Good morning to all of you. I hope you have settled well in Kakamega. My name is Dr. Marilyn Karani, and I am honored for the opportunity to share the knowledge I have gathered on gender equality. I am the executive director of a consulting firm which we called Gilead One Global Health Consultants, and our vision is our vision is optimum global health. I formed this company having reinvented myself from a career civil servant for 35 years. I have now become a business executive, and I'm happy in that space. Allow me to point out that there is limited information on gender equality in Kenya, particularly our veterinary profession. And it's my hope that going forward, we'll have many people undertaking studies on this area. So without much more wasted time, let us move to the presentation. The title of my presentation is Gender Equality and Professional Well-Being in the Veterinary Profession. So my presentation outline will include introduction. There'll be something on gender equality in STEM, gender equality in the veterinary profession. We'll talk about why we aspire to gender equity. We'll also talk a little about the impact of gender inequality on mental health, the symptoms of mental illness, preventing gender inequality-related mental illness at work, system-wide strategy for gender equity. We'll also address gender equality in STEM and the veterinary profession. And finally, we'll end with the strategies for gender equality at the workplace. So, the objective of this presentation is really to create awareness on the impact of the gender inequality on mental health in the veterinary profession. And so to start us off, I'd like us to remember that the story of veterinary medicine goes back to a gentleman called Ulu Galedina, who lived in 3000 BC in Mesopotamia. He was the expert in healing animals. Vet school didn't take off until 1761 in a place called Lyon in France. And back home here, the first class of vet graduated in 1970, and there was only one female veterinary doctor by the name of Dr. Rachel Masake. So, how do we define gender equality and gender equity? I'd like to say that gender equality is treating everyone the same way, often while assuming that everyone also starts out on an equal footing or with the same opportunities, which we know that doesn't often happen. Gender equity, on the other hand, is working towards fair outcomes for people or groups by treating them in ways that address their unique advantages or barriers. So that is the difference. So you see that gender equity is the means of getting to gender equality. And we need to note that advantages or barriers are due to systems, biases, and privileges outside of individual control. So as we'll see a little bit later, some of the biases is our cultural norms, which we think are okay, but they are really biases against one gender. And so a bit of information on what is happening in the workforce. We know that globally, 47% of women participate in the workforce compared to 74% of men. We also know that women global share of leadership is increasing, but we haven't reached the 50%, so that the women in senior roles make 31%, which is a far cry from what it should be. Even with the 31%, The women are overrepresented in the support functions, whereas men are concentrated in operations and other areas which are viewed critical, such as CEOs and board level positions. So what does this mean? The women are missing at the decision table because the CEO and the boardroom is where policies are made, is where major decisions are made. So if the women are busy sweeping, cleaning, and not being on the decision-making table, it means that their voice is not heard. So in Kenya, an example, the cabinet, the current one of 2023, does not meet the threshold despite the dictates of the constitution. And this picture ahead of us is what the constitution looks like. You can see there are how many women? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 23 positions. So we have not reached that gender, 2/3 gender rule. So what does the gender equality look like in the STEM subjects? And we can see that globally, girls and boys enroll and complete primary school at about the same rates, but gaps persist in specific countries like ours, to the disadvantage of girls. Sub-Saharan Africa is where Kenya belongs. But if you go to Latin America, the girls are actually doing much better than the boys, and so it's a disadvantage to the boys. We also note that enrollment and completion rates are lower at the secondary level, and there are differences across countries by income level. So the poorer countries have fewer girls, enrolling and completing secondary school. We have seen in the recent past the percentage of young girls getting pregnant, and other social issues, early marriages, which contribute to this scenario. We also want to note that girls often perform as well as the men or the boys, or better than boys in science and mathematics. That's a known fact, and I have referenced Hammond, a paper that was written in 2020, and you can see it at the end of the presentation. Excuse me. So veterinary medicine is actually a STEM subject, and gender equality is yet to be achieved in the veterinary practice. We know that, for example, in Kenya, that the number of females has been increasing in the profession, but we have not reached a stage where we can say we have 50-50%. So we're still lagging behind. So according to a survey in the UK, 34% of respondents had experienced gender discrimination. And this was a study done by Freestone and someone called Remnant and Gamari. And so we know that in the veterinary profession, there's some sort of discrimination going on. It's only that, like in Kenya, we don't know what the percentages are. But we all know that there are rumors that go around of discrimination and other forms of gender issues which promote gender inequality. And 77% of the people that were interviewed said that the discrimination affected their career. In a little while, we'll see how. So what about gender equality in the veterinary profession? We know that for sure there is stereotyping of certain fields. For example, people say large animal practices are for the men, and gender inequality in placements was also reported, so that the women prefer to go to small animal clinics while the men head to the large animal practices. And there are other vices in the profession, such as sexism from their colleagues and clients. So there is outright discrimination. Sometimes when you go to the field, they demand for a male veterinarian, and such practices, such as seeking a second opinion. If I go for a clinic as a lady, and I tells a farmer that maybe your animal is suffering from East Coast fever, they're likely to ask for a second opinion from a male discrimination, just stemming from the culture that women are not good enough. So why should we aspire to gender equality? We know that gender equality is a fundamental human right. This is according to the UN, the Article 1. We also know that it's also in our constitution, the Constitution of Kenya 2010, which is under the Bill of Rights. You'll find the details in the references. So the other importance is that the gender equality is essential to achieve peaceful societies with full potential and sustainable development. So without that, without gender equality, we are likely not to get to the sustainable development goals. We also need to know that women who are empowered spur productivity and economic growth. There's a phenomenon in Kenya, the women groups, and I think all of you can witness, perhaps through your mothers or sisters or daughters, just how powerful these groups are in terms of, providing for the family. So gender equality is that important. Now, what are some of the impacts of gender inequality? I want to say that gender inequality, has many vices. One of them is gender-based violence. We also have compromised physical and mental health. Inequality causes unequal access to quality education and health, and also to economic resources, and also participation in political life. It also causes unequal opportunities to employment and positions of leadership and decision-making at all levels. There are many other vices that, are attributed to gender inequality, and that's why it is important that we handle it, so that both gender can enjoy human rights and a fruitful life. So I want to dwell a little on the impact of gender inequality on health. And I would like to say that when we talk about gender, most often we talk about the women, but we know that there are cases where the gender that is suffering is the male, and therefore each gender has to be promoted so that we have equality. So the first thing that happens to someone who has a gender inequality problem either has been violated by physical harm or psychological abuse or sexism or discrimination is the psychological effects. And from this, you get higher levels of stress, anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder in the marginalized gender. So whichever gender it is, they're going to suffer this. You will remember from our studies that when you have anxiety, you have cortisol, and with cortisol, a lot of other things come in. So you get a compromised immune system, you get physical illness, and you get social phobia leading to seclusion. So somebody decides, I don't want to be part of this community or social group. I would rather hide in my closet. So you also get mood disorders. You get depression. Of course, you witness lower socioeconomic status, and you also witness poor health indicators. So like these people, because of their stress, they're never going to be, 100% okay. They will have a compromised immune system, so that if there's a bug going around, they'll be the first to catch it, just because they're suffering from gender inequality. So how do we recognize that a colleague is unwell? And I hope we recognize that most of the symptoms we've been describing earlier is really mental health issues. So the first thing that we see from these people is withdrawal from friends, family, and colleagues. These people prefer to be alone. We also see avoiding activities they would normally enjoy. They either sleep too much or too little. They eat too much or too little. And also they feel hopeless. They will have consistently low energy, so people are tired all the time. They may begin to use mood-altering substances such as alcohol or nicotine, just to kind of like hide away from the emotions that they feel. You also see a display of negative emotions. People might, just have outbursts, or they might fight easily, or get into an anger rage very, very easily. They often will be confused, and they also think about causing physical harm to self and others. So that means they could be contemplating suicide. So those symptoms are heavy, and we need to figure out how to address this on an individual and as a community. And I would like to suggest that the first thing we should do is to address workplace harassment through good human resource as well as professional body policies, which encourage reporting and punishing the perpetrators. I haven't looked at our KVA policies so deeply, but we do need to have something on gender equality to encourage mental well-being. The other thing that we need to do is to have gender equality training both in the veterinary curriculum as well as in continuous professional development. So we also need to provide a gender-friendly environment, beginning with the infrastructure. I don't know how many hotels I have been to, and you find the washroom that the female gender goes to does not have hooks to hang handbags, is not friendly for what we, for the attributes that are attributed to the female gender. And so we have to start, beginning from the infrastructure. What will it take for both gender to be comfortable? So that we can do as an association, what we've spoken about, but we also have to consider the systems. How do we deal with a wide system to encourage gender equity? So some of the things we may do is to feature female role models, and these role models provide examples of the kind of success that one may achieve. The girls, either the girls or the boys can emulate this role model and see that themselves in this role model. We also need to promote partnerships with the private sector so that the private sector can play a role by bringing financial support to non-profit STEM initiatives, and also by facilitating exposure to female role models and internship opportunities targeting secondary schools or boys, whichever the case might be. So that role modeling is very important. We also need to address gender biases in learning materials, so that if there are female authors, we should have their biographies, so that, or male authors, we should have everyone's biographies included. We also need to engage parents, encouraging them to take their children, to encourage their girls or boys to do STEM subjects, and this way the parents can contribute in reshaping the girls into participating in veterinary medicine. We also need to encourage participation in extracurricular activities, and have visits to veterinary medicine campuses, museums, competitions, extracurricular clubs, robotics, everything that will encourage girls to step into the STEM area. So what about strategies for gender equality at the workplace? I would like to suggest that first of all, we need to have parental leave policies where both gender, when they have a baby, both of them should go on leave. We should have flexible work, to encourage each gender to be the best version of themselves. We need to have employer-supported childcare, and I think it's high time that this public service began thinking like this, that people are stressed if they have to mind their children away from the workplace, and so we need to figure out how to go about that. We need to have anti-sexual harassment policies visibly displayed, and I know that in the offices these policies were not there. We need to have salary history bans, pay transparency. This may not be very prominent in the civil service because it's an equal opportunity employer, but in some private organizations there is discrimination on the amount of money that everybody takes. We also need to address gender wording on the job, like how do we communicate? Do we include both gender? We do need to test the role models and mentors for women and male-dominated sectors of work. So like in veterinary, which is one of them, do we expose our women role models, our male role models, so that the girls can know that something can be done about this? The other thing is to combine mentoring with professional development, and I think KVA has done really well in this area. We do need male advocates. We haven't seen so many of them advocating for gender equality. And of course, we do need to have increased visibility of female faculty. The other thing we need to do at the workplace is to use gender inclusive communication. Very, very important. How do we communicate? Do we joke around with one gender? So an inclusive gender communication strategy is very, very important. In conclusion, I would like to say that the way to tackle gender inequality is through our organization culture, where accountability, language and communication, organizational values, role modeling, team norms is encouraged for gender equality. We also need to look at our systems in terms of hiring, performance management, promotion, recruitment. We need to look at our policies, things like family leave, flexible work hours, non-discrimination, pay, sexual harassment, all those. And finally, we need to look at our programs. Are they inclusive? Are we mentoring? Are we sponsoring? And with that, I would like to say thank you very much for listening to me. The subsequent slides are the references that we need, and kindly go through them as we learn. I would like to thank you and happy day.